So this is the last week of our Good Life series, and this series has been about the Beatitudes. And today we're going to get to the last Beatitude, and I can't believe we did all this in 5 weeks, but we did. We got them all in, and we only have one left. And it must have been one of the most important ones because Jesus saved it for last, and He elaborated. He gave us the Beatitude, and then He elaborated after that. And we're going to talk about all of that today, but before we get to that, this may seem like I'm going off course a little bit, but just hang with me because I know what I'm doing. Believe it or not, I know what I'm doing. So, but the first thing, as I was thinking about this whole thing this week and just really trying to soak in the whole magnitude of what this Beatitude is all about, because it's the hardest one, y'all. It's the hardest one. It's the most difficult one of all of the Beatitudes. And I read and I studied and I wanted to hear what other people had to say about it. And so I did a lot of, just looking out there to see what other people thought and what they had discovered. And as I was kind of putting all that together in my mind last night, it hit me this one thing. You have no idea what's in you until it comes out. Now, some of you already know that, right? Some of you already know that sometimes some things come out of us and, whoa, I didn't know that was in there. But as a Christian, this is the thing. As a Christian, we have this seed of Christ in us. We have this DNA, this spiritual DNA in us. And we have no idea what can come out of that at the appropriate time. This is very important, y'all. Very important. We have no idea what is hidden in that seed of Christ. Any of y'all ever planted a garden? I planted a garden a few years ago, and this was a new experience for me. I'd never done this before, and I did everything that you were supposed to do, and I prepared half of my backyard, and I plowed up my grass, and I put the compost in and prepared the ground and the irrigation system and everything. And I put the seed in the ground, and for a week, nothing happened. Nothing happened. I'd go out there every day. I was expecting, this was going to be like an overnight thing. I water the heck out of the garden, and the sun is shining, and the seeds ought to come up. And for a week, nothing happened. You may think, nothing is happening. I'm a Christian now, and nothing's changed. I look the same. Everything has stayed the same. I look and act and think and everything. But at the appropriate time, something will happen. I'm going to get into this later. Something will happen that will pull out of you, that will draw out of you the nature of Christ in such a way it will shock the daylights out of you. You will be able to love. You'll have a capacity to love that you did not know was there. You'll have a capacity for courage that you didn't. You'll say, I didn't know I was that brave. I didn't know I was that bold. Well, you weren't, but Christ was. You'll come into a situation, you'll come into a set of circumstances, and something will be drawn out of you because it's what's needed at the appropriate time. Now, in Galatians, this is one of my favorite scriptures. I've used it before. It talks about this. It says, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Now, I got impatient on my garden, and I went out there, and about 4 days in, and I started digging up seeds to see if there was anything happening out there. And what I saw was the seed was breaking open, and this little green shoot was coming out. I dug up a little bit of corn, and I dug up a little bit of peas, and I dug up the okra, and I was checking to see, make sure that I did everything right, and these seeds were actually going to come up. In no time at all, a few weeks, my whole garden area was just green and full and lush and just alive, and it was beautiful. And I tell you, I took pictures of it because I just thought it was the greatest thing. And I've got pictures somewhere. I know Lene has pictures. She has pictures of everything. But it was just so beautiful, and it came up in the proper time. It came up when the sun beat down on that ground and warmed that ground, and the rain came, and my irrigation and my fertilizer and all that stuff that I did, my compost and all that. In the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Now, this is so important. We have to stand with Christ. We have to walk with Him, and we have to stand with Him, and do not give up. Do not give up. Stand with Christ. It will cost you something. I promise you. It will cost you something if you walk with Jesus and you stand with Christ. It will cost you money. It will cost you a relationship. It will cost you something. It will cost you an opportunity. It will cost you something, but I guarantee you that it will be worth anything, whatever the cost. Now, there are two words that Jesus began every beatitude with. At least it's that way in our Bible. And these two words are, blessed are. Blessed are. Problem is that the Aramaic that Jesus used did not use this word are. There is actually no verb in the Beatitudes. Blessed are. There is no are. The are is missing. The more appropriate translation would be something like this: "Oh, the blessedness of," or "Oh, the bliss of." I love that word, the bliss. "Oh, the bliss of." "Oh, the blessedness of," or "Oh, the bliss of," whatever the beatitude is. Now, our beatitude today is, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." The better translation would be, "Oh, the bliss of those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Oh, the bliss. Oh, the bliss to be persecuted? How is that? Well, it hit me. It hit me this week that Jesus, when we read the Beatitudes, we see this as, if you do this, then God will do that. If you do this, then this will happen. So there's a beginning, and then there's a, if you do this, then this will happen. But that's not what Jesus was saying. He was saying that there is something in there. There's something, when you are persecuted, there's something already there that is blissful. I know this seems contradictory, but it's not. There is something blissful about being persecuted. There is something in you that you did not know was there, but it comes out when you're persecuted. And Jesus, He says this. He says, "Blessed are you," when He goes on. This is after the list of the Beatitudes. This is Him elaborating on this last one. He said, "Blessed are you when people insult you, they persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Blessed are you." Oh, the bliss of when people insult you, when people persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. We look at this and we say, well, we're supposed to be happy about this because we're going to have a reward in heaven. And we find that hard to do. We find that hard to be happy about some hardship that we're going through here and now. When someone accuses us, has anybody ever accused you? That is one of the worst feelings in the world, to be accused. I have been accused of things. I could name probably 5 things in my life. I never have forgotten them because I was falsely accused of something, and it makes an emotional impression on you when you are falsely accused. And we read this and we think, oh, that means that when I'm falsely accused, I need to be thinking about when I die and go to heaven, and that's supposed to make me feel better. But I think what Jesus is saying is, and you have to picture this, his disciples, he's standing on the side of this hill. His disciples are here, and the thousands of people are out here, and he's telling these people, but he's also telling his disciples, because he knows that shortly, in a few weeks or months, they are going to experience exactly what he's talking about. And they did. I want to take a look at a real situation that happened, and it's found in the book of Acts. The thing that was happening is the Jews, they killed Jesus, the Sanhedrin, they killed Jesus, and they thought that would be all, that it would be over. That would be all there was to it. But then his disciples began to preach and teach in his name, and they began to proclaim that Jesus is the Messiah. The very thing that got Jesus crucified, there in the temple courts, and they're proclaiming this truth that Jesus is Lord and that Jesus is the Messiah. And so this is what they did. They called the apostles in. The apostles now, these are the disciples that were with Jesus that day on that mountainside as he was telling them the Beatitudes to encourage them. And now they are the apostles. And so the Sanhedrin called the apostles in and they had them flogged. Do you know what it means to be flogged? This is what happened to Jesus before he went to the cross. These guys who did the flogging, I call them floggers. Not bloggers, not vloggers, floggers. These guys were experts. They knew how to beat a person within an inch of their life. They knew how to beat them as severely as they could be beaten and not kill them. And that's what happened to the apostles. They were flogged. Then they ordered them not to speak in the name of Jesus, and they let them go. The apostles left the Sanhedrin, blood still coming out of their wounds. They left the Sanhedrin rejoicing because they had been counted worthy of suffering disgrace for the name. You know what I think happened? I think this shocked the daylights out of those disciples, those apostles. I think that whenever they had been beaten and when they left, joy came out. Where did that come from? Where did that joy come from? It came from that seed of Christ that was in them. It was that harvest that they were reaping in the proper time. That situation pulled and drew out the Spirit of Christ in them, and they went away rejoicing that they had been counted worthy of suffering disgrace for the name. Some of you are saying, well, I don't think I could do that. If I had just been beaten within an inch of my life, all over my body, and they told me not to preach in the name of Jesus, I think I would just say, okay. That's what I have thought many times. Whenever I read this, I think, I wonder if I could do that. I wonder if I have in me what it takes to rejoice in a situation like that. And if you're just looking at who you are without the Spirit of the living God residing in you, then you're right. You couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. But there are people in this world today who are suffering this kind of persecution. And you hear stories about them. They're always somewhere over in another country and they are being persecuted by some radical group, and they're being tortured and they're being killed, and you hear the things that they say and the things, the love that comes out, the forgiveness, like Stephen, the first martyr, who said, like Jesus said on the cross, he said, do not lay this sin to their charge. Do not blame them for my death. This is what Stephen said. This is the Spirit of Christ that comes out. And you may think, well, I could never do that. I don't even want to think about that. That's too hard to think about. I'm telling you, though, if it ever happened, you would see that there is more in you than you ever thought there was. You would see the Spirit of Christ has a remedy for whatever situation you're in. So they went away rejoicing. And what do you think they did after that? Did they stop? No. Day after day in the temple courts. Listen, they didn't just hide out in their houses and proclaim Jesus. No, they went back to the temple. They went to the temple courts where the very same guys that had them flogged were standing there in their pious, righteous, white robes looking on as these followers of Jesus, probably still wounded from that flogging, were proclaiming Jesus, proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the Messiah is the thing that got Jesus killed. Jesus, he said the thing that you just couldn't say. He said, I am the Messiah. And this is the thing that they were proclaiming. Now, I wanted to give you just a picture of what it was like for people, the early church, early Christians that were living in that time and in that place. It was not a culture anything that resembled anything like what we are in today. Because if you look at the studies in the United States of America, about 80% of Americans believe, or they say they believe, that Jesus was the Son of God. And so the way I say it, like this, that 80% of the citizens in the United States, 80% of the people in the United States are friendly toward Christianity. They're at least friendly toward Christianity. This was not the case with the early church. So if you were a Christian, it was likely that people that you worked with, people that you lived with, your neighbors, your friends, your family, it was likely that a lot of them, many of them, were not Christians at all. They worshiped pagan gods. And Caesar had come to believe that he was a god. And so he made this rule that once a year, everybody in the kingdom of Rome, had to say this phrase, Caesar is Lord. And whenever they said Caesar is Lord, the government gave them a certificate. And then they could go and worship any god that they wanted to worship. And so all these people, the whole people in the whole kingdom, they were all doing what they were supposed to do according to Caesar. They said, Caesar is Lord. They got their certificate. And then they were able to do whatever it was that they wanted to do. Worship any god that they wanted to worship. So it seemed weird or strange to most people when Christians wouldn't say the phrase. They wouldn't say it. They wouldn't get their certificate because they could not do it, because they were standing with Jesus. You understand what I'm saying? They were walking with Him. They were standing with Him. And to stand with Jesus, as I said before, will cost you something. In this case, it cost many of them their lives, and many of them were persecuted because they stood with Jesus. They could not say that Caesar is Lord. Now, they also had these practices that the pagan priests would call for the people to give sacrifices, and so the people would bring their sacrifice. They would bring an animal to be sacrificed, and the very common practice was for the animal to be sacrificed, part of the meat would be offered, and then the priest would take some of the meat, and then he would give the rest to the person who brought the sacrifice. Well, now this person has this huge piece of meat, and they bring it home. They can't put it in the freezer. They don't have a freezer. And so they invite all their friends to come and have a feast. This was a big deal. I mean, it was a fun thing to do. You know, so-and-so, they gave their sacrifice, and now they're having a party, and they would name the party in honor of whatever god it was that they sacrificed that meat to, or that animal to, and they would eat the meat. But Christians could not do that, see, because they could not eat meat that was sacrificed to idols. They could not be a part of that. There's some things that we cannot be a part of because we stand with Jesus. Because Jesus is our Lord. There's some things that we just cannot be a part of. You've heard me talk about abortion. I'm very open about my view on abortion. You cannot stand with Jesus and walk with Him and serve Him and go and support things like abortion. You can't support bigotry and hatred and racism and those kinds of things. You can't say that my allegiance is to a political party or to some type of social group over God. Not if you are a Christian. It doesn't work that way. It's just the way it is. If you stand with Jesus, if you stand with Him, you walk with Him, your life will be different. And there's some things that you cannot be a part of. That's the way it was for these early Christians. People looked at them and they said, well, they're weird. They greet each other with a holy kiss and they're always meeting. They're always going to these meetings. So they said things like, they must be having some kind of sex party or orgy or something like that. And so they said these evil things about the Christians, and they said they're weird. All they have to do is just come and eat with us at the feast. But no, now they're not friends of ours anymore because they're weird and they won't come to our parties anymore. It cost them something. It didn't cost everybody their lives. It doesn't. And in our culture today, we are not beaten because of our beliefs, because we're Christians. We are not killed. And there are people working overtime in this country to try to take our religious freedom away from us. They would love to take our religious freedoms away from us. But we don't know what it's like. We don't know what it was like for the early church. We don't understand that kind of mentality. We have our mind on other things because we're not persecuted like they were. But if we stand with Jesus, I promise you that there will be some type of persecution in your life. And when it happens, you will find out what God has implanted in your soul. And Jesus continued on, and I'm doing this without skipping a verse. He continued on, and he began to talk about salt. He said, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. So what is salt? I'm sure that you know the things that I'm going to say. First of all, salt is pure. They had a saying, the Romans had a saying, as pure as salt. They looked at salt as being pure. It was white. We say pure as snow because snow is white, right? It's pure as snow. But they said pure as salt. Salt to them represented purity. And because you could take a piece of meat and preserve it with salt and keep it from decay, then they also had this other saying that salt was life. It was life-giving. Salt was life-giving. Salt is pure. Salt is life-giving because it would keep the meat from decay. They also, of course, loved salt. All the people during this period of time and even forward, I mean, us today, we all love salt, right? Because it brings out the flavor of the meat. It brings out the flavor. And so he says that you are the salt of the earth. He said, but if salt loses its saltiness, now this is a problem for biblical scholars. I have read so much because for years and years, I'm telling you, for decades, I have wondered, what does this mean? Salt loses its saltiness? The problem is salt does not lose its saltiness. There's nothing that desaltifies salt. If you mix salt with something else, the product is that whatever you mix it with becomes salty. You cannot unsalt salt. You can't make it unsalty. And then Lene told me this about a year ago, and I'm telling you, I was so surprised. I mean, because I am reading the Bible, I'm studying all these years, and I'm trying to find an answer to this. How does salt lose its saltiness? And I was telling her that one day, and she goes, I know how salt loses its saltiness. I said, you do? I said, please enlighten me, because I have read what all the smart people have to say, and they say, I don't know what that means. She says, the only way salt loses its saltiness is to be diluted in water. You take a handful of salt and you dilute that enough with water, and you will not taste the salt anymore. That's the only way salt can lose its saltiness, is to be diluted. And we can lose our saltiness if we allow ourselves to be diluted. How many of you are diluted? I have been diluted before. And Jesus is saying, listen, if you're not salty anymore, you're of no use. He came to make us salty, so that everything we touch is pure. Everything that we are is life-giving. Everything that we are brings out the flavor of life. A Christian, one of the problems that I read in church history is that at some point, preachers, I'm just going to call them preachers and pastors and priests and these people who were leaders in the church, at some point, they lost their saltiness, and they became these dull, sad, pitiful people. And all they wanted to do is tell people, don't do this and don't do that, and they just, they were not fun to be around. And a Christian ought to be salty enough that they are fun to be around. They ought to bring out the goodness. They ought to bring out the life and the light in everybody around them. That's what a Christian ought to be. And then he starts talking about light. Very next verse. You are the light of the world. Now Jesus has already said, I am the light of the world. Now he's telling his disciples who sit in front of him, he says, you are the light of the world. And he says, a town built, he's given them common sense things. This is a common thing. Light is valuable. You don't have a town that's built on a hill and where there's light, it cannot be hidden. You never see a town on a hill at night that's dark. I live over the mountain, and when they put the Target shopping center in there, and I can even see over Green Mountain on that side where all those businesses have been built, and the light over the mountain at night, it just has gotten brighter and brighter and brighter as the years have gone by. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden. You can't hide it. If you have light, if you're the light of the world, you can't hide that. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. How silly would that be? Light a light and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. He says, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. He's saying, be the light. Be the light of the world. I have never told this story ever in a large group setting. And I'm going to give you the tame version of this story. When I was in college, we had this little what we called a prayer group. We met on Thursday nights. There were 5 of us, and there was my friend Rich, my friend Becky, my friend Wayne, and his wife Renee. And the way this got started is I went to their couples. I mean, this is crazy, but they had a couples Sunday school class, and my friends Rich and Becky went to that Sunday school class. And once they got to know me, and I was talking about Jesus 24/7, they said, "You got to come to our Sunday school class." And so I came to their Sunday school class, and I was the only single person in the couples Sunday school class. And that morning, we were talking about the storm. One of these times that Jesus was in a boat in a storm, and this guy Wayne, he came to be a good friend of mine, but he was the teacher of the class, and he said that morning, he said, "I feel tossed." He said, "I feel in my life like I am tossed, like the waves, you know." And I felt something in my soul when he said that disagreed with that so much. And he said, "I just feel tossed. I don't know, I just don't know." And I just feel, and he kept using that word tossed. And then he did something strange. I was sitting there, and I could hardly keep my mouth closed, but I was trying so hard to just keep my mouth shut and just make it to the end of the Sunday school class without saying something that's going to disrupt, because this is what happened to me during college. I would go to these Bible studies and these groups, and I would hear what they were saying, and somebody would ask me what I would think, and then I would say something, and they would shut the meeting down because what I said, it was not what they were talking about. Did not agree with what they were saying. So Wayne, he looks at me, and he doesn't even know me. He just knows that I'm a visitor, single guy, visitor to his class, and he says, "What do you think?" And I immediately said, "I'm not tossed." And he said, "You're not tossed?" I said, "No, I'm not tossed." I said, "I know Jesus." I said, "Once you know Jesus, you're not confused anymore. You're not tossed anymore. You got something in your soul that is solid." And I said, "That is how I feel in life. No matter how bad things get, no matter what is going on, I just have that rock, and it's always there." And Lene can tell you. She can tell you, sometimes things happen, and I lose my mind for a minute, but then I am back on solid footing. So we started this prayer group. We called it Bible study, prayer group, whatever. And we met every Thursday night. And Becky said one night, she called me one afternoon. She said, "Hey," she was an English major, and she said the head of the English department said that he asked me today, heard about our prayer group, and wanted to know if he could come and if we would lay hands on him and pray for him. And I said, "Well, I know that they did that in the Bible. They laid hands on people in the Bible. So, yeah, we'll lay hands on him if he comes." And she said, "Have you ever laid hands on anybody?" I said, "No." And she said, "You feel comfortable doing this?" I said, "No, I don't feel comfortable doing it." I said, "But the Bible says that they laid hands on people." And I said, "I think we should try it out." And so that night, this man, the head of the English department, came, and they came to their apartment, Rich and Becky's apartment, and he sat down on the floor, and he said, "I'm having back issues," and he pointed to the place. And so I put my hand on the place on his back, and everybody else put their hands on him, and we prayed for him. And after the prayer, he turned around to me, and he said, "Your hand felt like a hot iron on my back." And so I just put the back of my hand up to feel his shirt, and his shirt was hotter than my hand. It was strange, very strange. But it impacted him to the point where he said, "Can I bring my son next week to get prayer?" And I'm going to give you the tame version of this. But the next week, he brought his son, and his son had had an illness that left him with physical problems. And when I saw him come through the door, he had a limp. One side of his face was not symmetrical with the other. There were a multitude of physical problems that he had, and they named them to us as we were getting ready to pray. And I'll tell you what my thinking was. I was thinking, oh my gosh, this man has brought his son here for us to lay hands on him, thinking that something's going to happen, thinking that we can do anything about this. And in my own mind, I was thinking, there's no way. This is too much. I mean, I don't mind praying for somebody with a headache or a hurt back or a tummy ache, but this is beyond my ability. I mean, this is beyond anything that I can do. What do you do? What do you do in a situation like this? So anyway, this boy, I'm telling you, he was the most precious boy. He was probably 14 years old, I think, somewhere along in there. And he sat down on the floor and he said, the best that he could, he said, I want prayer for some things. And then he started naming some things. And he said, my jaw, I want my jaw to be healed. And so he took my hand. This is a young boy with faith, childlike faith. He took my hand and he put it on his jaw. And I thought, oh Lord, we are in uncharted territory now. Because I had my hand on a jaw that was out of place. And then he took the hands of the people who were kneeled down around him, and he put their hands on parts of his body. And I remember Becky, he said, I want you to put your hands on my head. And he put her hands on his head. And so that was what happened. And we all were gathered around him. And I'm going to give you the short version because I could give you the hour-long version. The short version is that as we began to pray, it was the right time. It was the right place. It was the right person. This boy had faith. Remember the times when Jesus said, your faith has made you whole? Your faith has healed you? That's what happened with this boy. His faith drew out of us something that we did not know was in there. The power to heal, the power to pray for someone and have a healing take place. It was just the right time. It was the right season. And so as we began to pray, bones began to move. Sounds were happening. Cracks and pops and things were happening. And I could feel under my hand on his jaw something was happening. And after that prayer, he got up and there were like 3 things that he had wrong with him that had been healed. It's the most incredible experience I've ever had in my life. And I'm going to tell you something. Every time I see somebody who was there that night, we talk about that night because to this day, none of us has ever experienced anything like that. Again, it is absolutely amazing. You don't know what you have to give until someone is in need in front of you. You don't know how thick and how strong your love and your compassion and your grace can be until the appointed time. But do this one thing. Walk with Jesus and stand with Him, and do not grow weary in doing that. You have no idea who's going to need you. You have no idea what situation God is going to call this incredible power, this incredible thing that He has put in each one of us. You have no idea what's going to happen when the time is right in due season. So stand with Jesus.